Been getting a lot of requests here. Finally, the Star Wars reviews are back on track. Let's do Return of the Jedi. Here we go. Star Wars Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, stars Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, Harrison Ford, and is directed by Richard Marquand. What is up, guys? Welcome to another Drumdums review, and we're jumping back on the Star Wars series. It's been a while since I put out Empire, a couple months ago. So long that I've been getting a lot of requests like, why are you not doing Return of the Jedi? I gave it a break. There's a lot of movies in this series, so I figured I'd let it breathe a little bit before I jump back in. I have 3 movies left to review for you guys before we get to Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. So we're doing Return of the Jedi. Looking forward to jumping into the sequel trilogy and doing The Force Awakens, as well as the very controversial The Last Jedi. And I do have my knee-jerk reaction reviews to both those movies when they first came out. So my thoughts on those movies could change quite a bit. And I say this all the time. We reviewers, a lot of times, what you're seeing are knee-jerk reactions, okay? And our opinions, like your opinions, could change over time. And that just makes it more fun to discuss. But we're going to do Return of the Jedi. And just to go back to like my memories of Return of the Jedi, this is the first Star Wars movie that I saw in the theater. I was 10 years old, and I remember my parents taking me to see this movie. And I wasn't that big of a Star Wars fan at the time, but I knew of Star Wars. I knew how big it was. And I remembered being in I think second grade, and when Empire came out and all my friends were talking about it and stuff. So that kind of sparked my interest. So when the third movie finally came, I said, oh, I want to go see this in the theater. And my parents, they didn't really take me to the theater that often. You know, I saw Superman 2, I think, right before that, or a few years before that. And then, so I really wanted to go see this one. They took me to see Return of the Jedi. And I remember sitting in the theater watching it and really having a blast with it. And the crowd was loving it. Everybody was freaking out. I still have those memories vividly in my head. But the big thing that really grabbed me about it was Luke Skywalker. I loved the journey that this character was taking throughout this movie. And remember, at this point, I had probably seen Empire Strikes Back and Star Wars, but I don't remember if I remember them that well at that point. I'm not making any sense. This whole thing was kind of new to me at the time. And, I grabbed onto Luke Skywalker. I loved his story. And Return of the Jedi was so good to me that I decided to go back and rewatch Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back. And later on in life, I became such a huge fan of the saga. And just to give a shout out to a good friend of mine, Kenny Donnell. I think I've given him a shout out before about this. We met in the Air Force, and I wish I had a picture to show you guys of Kenny, but he's the one that really got me into Star Wars. He was the Star Wars fanatic. All of you, if you're not the fanatic of Star Wars, you have a friend that is the fanatic of Star Wars. You're thinking of him right now. So anytime I think of Star Wars fanatics, Ken Donnell is the first name that pops in my head, just because he loves the franchise so much. So he's the one that really got me into the franchise. But, as the years went on and I would watch, I'd do my Star Wars runs in order, Return of the Jedi, it wasn't as strong to me. After I really discovered my love for Episode 4 and 5, there were those flaws for Episode 6 really stuck out to me. It still has some really solid moments. I still think the original trilogy is what we like to call a perfect trilogy. A perfect trilogy doesn't mean 3 perfect movies. It just means 3 consistently good movies. And I think Empire is the peak, and Return of the Jedi is a fitting conclusion. That's the big thing, because it's hard to close a story. It's hard to end a story and have people love it. I mean, we think back to Game of Thrones, that last episode, a lot of people were unsatisfied with it. I was so unsatisfied with it that I couldn't even review it. And so I get all these comments saying, where's your review of the last episode? And I'm going to review the last episode once I get to rewatch the whole thing again. But yeah, Return of the Jedi, I think most people agree, even those that don't like the movie, what they did between Luke and Vader in the end, it worked. You know, it was a fitting conclusion. It was nice that Luke did not succumb to the dark side. He, in a sense, won, and he mended that relationship with his father at like the very end of his father's life. So it has those like warm, mushy feelings to it in the end. But I was just in this place, Blaze Pizza, yesterday. It's a new pizza place we got here in town. And I had my Star Wars shirt on. And one of the employees, he was like, "Oh yeah, Star Wars, man. I freaking love that movie." I had Empire Strikes Back, and he said Return of the Jedi was his favorite movie of the whole franchise. And I was like, "Really? Return of the Jedi over Empire? Okay." But you know what? That's the great thing about Star Wars. Everybody has their favorites. You know, most people I'd say love Empire the best, but there are people out there that freaking love Return of the Jedi. But thinking back to Empire, what a cliffhanger of an ending. I mean, just imagine in 1980 when, you know, audiences saw Empire, Vader confesses that he is Luke's father, and then Luke is rescued by Lando Calrissian and Leia, and he has all this fog in his head. Like, what the hell just happened? Is Darth Vader my father? And then the credits roll. I'm sure a lot of people were like, wow. Like, because it wasn't 100% known if Vader was his father. The idea was out there. It was shocking. But this is a villain. Villains lie. So he could have been lying. So Return of the Jedi gives us that answer. We have that scene where Yoda is talking to Luke, and you know, he tells him, yes, he was your father, or he is your father. So you know, a lot of closure in Return of the Jedi, and that's really what you want. But let's jump into the very beginning of the movie. It really opens with C-3PO and R2-D2, and they're on Tatooine, and they're going to Jabba's palace. The big mission in the beginning of this movie is to rescue Han Solo. And so they end up going to Jabba's palace. And one thing I love about Star Wars is the world building. You know, and in Return of the Jedi, I think the two big things that we see in terms of world building are Jabba's palace. That's like a new aspect to it. And the Ewok section on Endor. And of course, we have the big space battles and all that. But those are really like the two big things. You know, the two new worlds that we run into. And so eventually Leia comes to Jabba's palace, and she is, you know, trying to make a deal to get a Han Solo. And of course, she's captured and captures the hearts of 1 million young, nerdy fanboys all over the planet with her bikini. One can't not talk about that bikini in Return of the Jedi. It is one of the most coveted things in sci-fi history. And so I'm going to pause for 5 seconds just so we can look at that picture of Leia in the bikini. But the funny thing is, you know, Carrie Fisher was such a funny person. Rest her soul. I mean, she just had this natural comedic quality to her. And she talked about, you know, wearing that bikini. And you only see her from the front, because she said if you looked at her from the back, you would see all the way to Florida. Those are her words. And it was pretty hilarious. And I like it because I live in Florida. But does that mean that she was like Jabba's sex slave? I don't know. Also, you got to mention the little dance routines. That's one thing that's kind of iffy for me. I remember when I saw it back in the theater, I didn't mind the little Jabba the Hutt dance scenes, you know, in Jabba's palace. There's two different versions, by the way. You have the special edition version where in '97, George Lucas created this whole new like CGI version. And really, that's the only version I remember. Because after the special edition came out, and of course the Blu-rays, and George Lucas was so hard-headed that he wouldn't release the original versions on Blu-ray or even DVD until he finally did give us like those really crap transfers. I just never watched that original version again. I know it's smaller, it's stripped down. But I think it's a fun sequence. It does what it needs to do. It has that Star Wars flavor to it. And I like that scene where the dancer, you know, she's dancing, trying to please Jabba, and then he pulls the trapdoor and she falls down. And then the Rancor gets to eat her. Some fun stuff's there, you know, and I think as heavy as Empire was, it was nice to have a little bit of a comedic breather here and there. So there were some fun moments in that beginning section. Then comes Luke Skywalker, and he looks like, you know, a seasoned Jedi in this scene. This is Luke Skywalker at like his full potential, or full potential up to this point, I guess. But I like the scene where he's trying to use his like Jedi mind powers on Jabba the Hutt, and that doesn't work. You know, that whole exchange between him and Jabba is really fun. And so Jabba outsmarts him. He outsmarts one of the most powerful Jedis by just dropping him through a trapdoor, and then Luke's got to fight this Rancor. And then the Rancor's keeper gets all misty-eyed, and that's a really funny moment. But really, I mean, this whole sequence, long story short, Lando Calrissian comes and saves the day. You know, it really has those elements of those like Saturday afternoon serials with the big action sequence, the big rescue. It's not the introduction of Boba Fett, but Boba Fett is pretty much don't blink and you might miss him. He literally just falls into the Sarlacc pit. And I think in the Sarlacc pit you like fall for 1,000 years or something like that, if that makes sense. But yeah, Boba Fett is dead. And at the time, George Lucas didn't realize how popular of a character Boba Fett would become. And so I think that was a big regret of his to kill Boba Fett so quickly. But I mean, this was the last chapter in the saga anyway, so I guess it didn't really matter. But after this section of the movie, the big team, they split ways. You got Luke Skywalker going. He goes to Dagobah, finds out about Vader being his father, and then he goes to confront his father to try to bring him away from the dark side. Darth Vader and Sidious want to do the opposite. They want to bring Luke Skywalker to the dark side. One thing that amuses me too is like Vader never picked up on Sidious's selfishness. I think he was getting tired of Vader and he wanted Luke to kill Vader so Luke could take Vader's place, which is kind of thin writing wise, but you know, it works. Then you got a new Death Star being made, and so Han and Leia and the crew, they go to Endor to aid in blowing up the Death Star. There's like some like device that they have to disable so that way they can go and kill the Death Star. Look, I'm not the Star Wars fan that some of you guys are, okay? So when they're on Endor, this is when they encounter the Ewoks. Perhaps at the time, the Jar Jar Binks of the franchise. And that's not to say that they were as bad as Jar Jar Binks, but they were probably as controversial. I mean, that's the one thing that a lot of people don't like about Return of the Jedi, if they don't like anything. I'm one of those people. I just cannot get into the Ewoks. I don't know what it is. Maybe their suits look a little bit too teddy bearish. They're a little bit too kid-friendly to me. And this is the last chapter in the Star Wars trilogy. And the meat and potatoes for me is that relationship between Luke and Vader. And to me, the Ewoks really just kind of get in the way of that. But, I mean, they were necessary to advance the story. But in the end, I found them extremely annoying. The big scene that everybody remembers is when C-3PO is pretty much their god. And so the gang uses C-3PO to save themselves. And then you got Luke Skywalker using his Jedi mind trick to elevate C-3PO. But I think the big message in the whole Endor sequence too is, kind of what Lord of the Rings was doing, you know. They were able to defeat this big technological empire with just nature. They used their wits and everything to build all these booby traps and use the land to create all these weapons. And so that's how they're able to beat, the empire. So it is a good message. When I'm going to watch a Star Wars movie, I rarely find myself throwing in Return of the Jedi. And the big reason, because I don't like the Ewoks. I don't know, they just kind of annoy me. It's weird. Also, since we're jumping into the cons a little bit here, Harrison Ford, I think it was publicly known at this time that he was kind of tired of the character. And I think his performance shows in this movie. I don't think he really had his heart and fire in this. Did I just use like a Rocky V reference? And thinking back to like the previous two movies, Han Solo is like one of the greatest characters there. And he does have some of those Han Solo moments. Look, he does a good job with his acting. But it's pretty evident that he's kind of tired of the character at this point. But the big thing that I love about Return of the Jedi is that last chapter. The big fight between Vader and Luke Skywalker. You know, Luke Skywalker goes there and he's like, I won't fight you. You're my father. The way that Vader gets him to fight is he uses his sister. You know, if you remember back when Luke was on Dagobah, it's revealed that Leia is actually his sister. And so when he is fighting Vader, that moment when he goes, sister. I just love the way that James Earl Jones delivered that line. You know, it's just really devious sounding.
If you will not turn to the dark side, then perhaps she will.
And from that moment, you get Luke, and he proclaims never, and then you know the fight goes on, and you got this great score by John Williams that's building up through the whole scene. It's a great scene, it really is. I don't think it's as good of a scene as that last act in Empire Strikes Back, and that could be because the director Richard Marquand in this movie, I don't think he was as seasoned as Irvin Kershner, but it's still a very powerful scene actually. Luke pretty much has the best of Vader. Vader is pretty much dead. And then Sidious, just sitting there on his throne pretty much. And he really antagonizes Luke and tells him, you know, do it, kill him, take his place. And this is the first movie where we actually see Sidious. I mean, we have the hologram of him in the last movie, but this is the first movie where Ian McDorman played the character. And, you know, even in this movie, Ian McDorman is so good. I think Sidious is just as interesting as Vader is. And he's a big part of why the last act of Return of the Jedi works so well. But, it kind of harkens back, I guess, forward to Revenge of the Sith, when Vader saves Sidious. Well, in this scene, Vader saves Luke by killing Sidious, picking him up and then throwing him down the shaft. And then you have that great moment between Luke and Vader. I remember the theater that I saw this with. The scene where that mask comes off, I couldn't breathe, because I really wanted to know what was behind that mask. And I thought they would never show what was behind Vader's mask. But sure enough, he takes the mask off and he looks like this old man. And he just, he's burned. He's got the scars on him and everything on his head. I believe in the original version he had eyebrows, and then they took the eyebrows off in the special edition, or maybe the Blu-ray release. But, it's a very moving scene. He says, I want to see my son with my own eyes. And it's moving. It's very good. And so you got that scene at the fire when Luke is standing over. And, it's just a proud moment for a son to finally reconnect with his father before his father passes. And really at the heart of the whole Star Wars saga is that relationship between Luke and his father. And that's why Star Wars works so well, because it's really kind of simple if you think about it. You got all these great battles and everything going on. You got all these interesting characters, but at the core, it's the story of a father and his son. And who can't relate to that? There's always these struggles between fathers and sons, and it makes for an interesting conversation. So in the end, guys, for a rating for Return of the Jedi, I would definitely give it I'll give it a low purchase worthy. Like Empire Strikes Back is one of my all-time favorite movies. But there are some really great scenes in Return of the Jedi. I still enjoy it quite a bit. It's just one of my least watched movies out of the whole saga, actually. Funny enough, even though it's like the closing chapter before the sequel trilogy. It's the Vader's closing chapter. So anyway, guys, post in the comments your thoughts on Return of the Jedi. Looking forward to hearing them. Really looking forward to jumping over to the sequel trilogy now. We're going to do Force Awakens. Hopefully I can get that review out within the next week or two. And then I'm really looking forward to talking The Last Jedi. Ooh, that's going to be an interesting one. Also, be sure to come over to Killer Flicks, where we talk horror all day and every day. And on Fridays, we do Free Fall Fridays. Follow me at Drumdums on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day, and Drumdum out.